Welcome back to the A Stroll Through the Library podcast. My name is Matt. As always, I am your host. And today I have got a guest with me that I told him before we started recording, and I'm not just saying it because he's here, but really I've probably recommended his books more than anyone else's out of the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, wow.
Giving a big
so
introduction. So this is Joshua Ryan Butler. He is the author of many books. I suggest you check them all out. He is the lead pastor of Willamette. Am I saying it?
Close, yeah, Willamette. You got it, man. Willamette. Yeah.
I got there. I'm sorry. I tried. I practiced it beforehand.
No, it's great, man. It's perfect.
But lead pastor at Willamette Community Church, and you are out in the Seattle, Washington area, correct?
It's actually in Portland, Oregon, and yeah, Willamette it's kind of a family of 5 churches. Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, so I'm not the lead pastor at Willamette, just in case Alex, our lead pastor, is listening to this.
I'm sorry, Alex.
Orchestrate some coup or something. No, that's great, dude. But yeah, so I'm a teaching pastor with our family of 5 churches here, which is awesome, man. Yeah,
that is awesome.
Really
okay,
sorry. Home stomping grounds from the Portland area, Oregon boy out here, and. Yeah, totally. So love pastoring out here. It's been
Dude,
good.
Absolutely. Well, that's the type of botched introduction that you can count on at a Stroll Through the Library podcast. I don't know that I've ever done it that bad, but appreciate you being on here, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
I know if you're not in the Northwest, Seattle and Portland, they just all kind of blend together, and they seem like the same thing.
It's like,
other, I'm sure. So,
and I know any listeners from California will absolutely probably just turn the podcast off at this point. But whenever somebody says they're from California, from Southern California, and they're like, oh, but not LA. I live in Riverside. I was like, that's LA. To me, that's LA because I'm from Maryland. It's all LA. The Pacific Northwest, I try to get more descriptive with it, but apparently messed that up. So it's all good.
Yeah, well, Portland is kind of like Seattle's little brother, obnoxious little brother that's got his own way of doing it. Like Seattle is about 3 hours north and is bigger, way more population, and tends to be like, Amazon and Boeing and the big, everything. Portland's
Nike out there.
A little more roughshod, a couple hours south. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, one of these days I'll get out there. The farthest I've gotten is California, but I haven't made it up there yet. So one day, I hear the coffee's good. So and the birthplace of grunge is pretty awesome.
Yes.
So one of these days. But anyway, I'll go ahead and jump in with some of the questions, and we'll talk about your book a little bit as we get newest book a little bit as we get in here. But an easy question to start things off. My favorite to start with is, as you think back when you were a kid, I guess the first part is, did you enjoy reading as a kid? Like I wasn't a fan, but eventually got there.
Dude, yeah, no, I loved reading, man. And honestly, I've been doing some reflection, even this last few years on why. And I actually kind of get into some of this in my newest book, the God is on Your Side one. But in reflecting, I don't think I realized for a long time that, there were dynamics of being kind of scared at home for a variety of reasons, and feeling rejected at school, kind of the last kid picked, whatever. And I think one of the things that I found with books early on, especially kind of fantasy and think Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, was like, the ability to almost escape into this other world. And I'm not saying escapism is good, but there was like a something powerful for the imagination of being able to enter these other worlds and find a lot of amazing things there. So for example, I remember when I was pretty young, I think I was second grade or so, if I remember right, uncle gave me a copy of Fellowship of the Ring, kind of Lord of the Rings trilogy. And so classic, kind of cliche there, maybe like, I love Lord of the Rings, but like, I think I was maybe a little younger than typical, and he was like, I think this is a bit above your reading level. And I was like, I'll show you, so I took it and dove in and just fell in love. But man, and I don't think I could have necessarily explained it back then, but what was I drawn to in Lord of the Rings? And I think you've got this story with kind of these the hobbits are sort of like the rejects of Middle Earth, these little whatever, and yet they're drawn into this grand adventure of something much bigger than themselves that they're invited to participate in and whatnot. And I think as a young kid who felt kind of like rejected and whatever, like there was actually something really powerful of finding yourself in the story where you're actually called into something bigger and grander and that requires sacrifice, but also, yeah. So all that to say, man, Lord of the Rings actually, a lot of different books when I was a kid, but that one really stood out. And it was interesting too, because I didn't grow up in the church, but a friend of my mom's was a pastor and he
Mm.
gave her this children's Bible. I still remember it was called Eagermeyer's Children's Bible. And he was like, hey, your kid might be interested in this, So she passed it off to me. And so even though we didn't grow up in the church, I grew up reading this children's Bible from a young age. I remember reading it like 5 times over the
That
next
is
few years
cool.
and just being immersed in it. And oddly, yeah, I don't really remember the New Testament stories about Jesus, but the Old Testament stories really stood out.
Yeah.
And I remember being drawn particularly to like Abraham, Moses, David were kind of like the Lord of the Rings, dude. Like they were, I think one of the things that really struck me was like how honest and raw the Bible was with the painful, disappointing parts of the story. Like, so
Yep.
Abraham, where he's like, dude, he's told you're going to be father of a great nation, and it's like, dude, he's
Yeah.
now old and no kids. And God, where's that at? And I remember kind of this picture with this look of anguish on his face, or Moses, like the sense of you're going to deliver my people, in 40 years, he's out herding sheep in the wilderness thinking he botched it by killing
Yep.
the Egyptian, or David, dude, you're going to be king. And he's like on the run from Saul for around a decade or so of his life. Yeah. Like, and so there's a sense of like, man, there's God and there's mystery and there's transcendence, there's beautiful, powerful stuff, but there's also like suffering and pain and disappointment and whatnot. And those two, Lord of the Rings and that Eagermeyer's Children's Bible, were really formational early influences with just, I think, my imagination and reading life that, yeah, that had a pretty big impact.
No, I think that's awesome. I know on the show it's probably getting to the point where I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point, but we talk a lot about the fact that like fiction in general just gives the ability to understand it, not to say that the Old Testament is fictional or that the Bible is fictional, because I do not believe it is, but at the same time giving that context for like grasping bigger truths. And I think kids
Yes.
especially get that in such a way. It might be part of that come to me with childlike faith mentality of like, I'm open to this world of wonder. And I think you might be the first person I've talked to who was reading the Bible in a non-Christian household consistently as a kid. However, with that being said, I'm not surprised because the story
Yeah.
is so good. I mean, from a literary sense, it just is the greatest story ever told. Yeah, I've got a friend who's a public school high school teacher, and I was talking with him last night about the idea that he teaches a class on horror once a year with high school seniors, which is such a fun topic in general.
Whoa.
But he's talking about the fact that he weaves the Bible into it, and he's like, I can do that not because I'm trying to like shoehorn like Christianity into this conversation, but because it's such a good book for these conversations. When you read Frankenstein, you see these themes come up over and over and over again. Like it's in there, and just kind of tied into the fabric of humanity. So I think that's awesome. You give us a little bit of information there, and I think that's awesome. What is going on? So you didn't grow up in church, but kind of what's going on at that point in your life as you're starting to read these stories? What does life look like for little Josh?
Yeah, yeah, totally, man. Well, I remember we used to have this tree fort kind of out in the backyard,
Oh yeah.
or when it was really rainy. It rains a ton here in the Northwest, and so the tree fort was covered, so I could kind of sneak back up there, or I could, yeah, go find kind of a quiet corner in the house and, dude, immerse myself in a good book. Dude, I think, like I mentioned, I mean, two big themes were, feeling kind of rejected at school and bit scared at home. But like, I had a best friend, next door neighbor, he was like 2 years older, but he had this like vivid imagination, and so he was
Yeah.
always making up like crazy games as well. And so it felt like we were almost like creating stories as well as kids, you know? So, dude, there was like one of this this kind of ghost-like character that in this nearby orchard, and so we'd kind of hop the
Oh
fence
yeah.
and sneak into this nearby orchard, but like looking out for like the kind of ghostly figure who was in there, you know. And so I just
Yep.
remember being kids and like, dude, we would kind of enter into our imagination. Like I remember being convinced, or pretty sure, like, oh
Yeah.
man, there's something spooky and crazy and weird going on in this orchard. But we'd have these wild adventures back there. We played this game called car tag, where I won't get into the details. We also had ways of getting cars to chase us, which was mostly like drunk high schoolers, you know, from the nearby
Yep.
high school on the
Yep.
weekends. And we were elementary, you know, kids like get these guys to chase us all through the neighborhood and all. Or man, we would go on these adventures. We had a lot of outdoor kind of fields and hills and whatever in back near us, but we would just basically, like Kevin and I and a few other neighborhood kids, we would make up these intense stories. And so I think there was this interplay of both receiving fiction, you know, and receiving
Yeah.
nonfiction with scripture and all as well, but like biblical uh and from a lot of these fiction books, like receiving kind of rocket fuel for your imagination, you know? And then also creating, like going out and creating these adventures that we would go on together. Um, where it's like, dude, I look back and yeah, I know I go back to visit my hometown, you know, and it's like, okay, these are just now it's almost like maybe negative as an adult. You're kind of stripped of some of your imagination. Like, oh, that was just a field, and oh, that was just whatever. But growing up, you're able to craft these narratives that just shape how you live and move and exist in the world around you. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was pretty powerful.
No, no, absolutely. I went back. I now live in Kansas, but grew up in Maryland, and went back and visited a couple years ago. And I went for a jog in the morning, and I passed by this old protected stream. Is what it used to be. There's now a bridge there. But I passed by there, and I remember thinking when I was a kid, it was like this magic world. Like we could step into Narnia when we walked into this. And I passed it, and I was like, it's just a hole full of trash now. Like I don't think it
Yeah.
was all that different back then either. It just kind of it is what it is. But it is that imaginative side of kids that, like, I don't know. I think even as a parent, there's a huge benefit to being able to watch how my kids interact with stories that they hear at church, the things that they're reading, that they're taking in, and then just watching them play. My goodness, I'm like, I wish I could like turn off my brain enough to enjoy just kind of sitting on the couch and pretending that your pillows are a fort or whatever else. It's
Yes.
an awesome thing, that's for sure. So no, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
uh Getting into some of the other books, so we go from Lord of the Rings and kind of all of that love of books as a kid and that side of things into kind of as you've gotten older, lived a little bit more life. Is there a book? Some people are rereaders. I am not typically a rereader myself, but there are a few that I go back to, some each and every year. But are you the type of person who likes to reread books? And if so, is there one that you've kind of come back to many times?
Oh man, it's a great question. You know, honestly, no. What I do is I am like a marker. I mark my books up like
Yes.
crazy.
Yep.
So I can't go digital, dude. I know you can highlight or whatever, but like for a
It's
variety of
not the
reasons,
same.
I like
No.
the tangible, you know, in my
Yep.
hand. And so I've usually got a pen and I am marking the heck out of that thing, dude. So, and which makes it really easy where if I do want to go back for something in it, like I can kind of thumb through and find the thing. But I honestly, I don't tend to reread much
Sure.
or tend to mark the heck out of things and then go back and find stuff if I'm looking for something specific.
Yeah, no, totally. In fact, my favorite, and I haven't done it as much since we moved out here, but one of my favorite things, and I know that's weird, I understand this, but going to like uh a Goodwill or a used bookstore and finding books that someone else has annotated and marked up is
Mm,
one of my favorite things. Being able to like scroll through there and you're like, oh, this is what someone else found interesting. It might have no grounds on what I've got going on in life, but it's still
yeah,
interesting to see. And
that's
I don't know,
awesome.
might be weird, but it is one of my favorite things.
No,
Cause
that's
yeah,
awesome, man. Yeah, I get to see what stood out to them, and yeah,
no, when I moved into this office here year and a half ago, they had taken down all of the bookshelves that are up on the wall behind me and all around this room.
yeah.
And the church had taken them down because they were like, "Hey, we hired a young guy. He's gonna have all his books on an iPad. Like he's not gonna have any." They took him down. I came in and I was like,
No way, man.
"No, we need to put up like 4 more because I only
Yeah.
like physical books. I can't." Sometimes an
Huh.
audiobook is good, long drives, but that's about it.
Yes.
That's about it.
Yep.
But
Yes.
but no, I
Definitely.
appreciate it, man. Thank you. So has there ever been a book that you've read that just kind of flipped your perspective on God or faith or life in general? And if so, what was it?
Yeah, I'd say so. The first book that really impacted me when became a Christian. So, kind of in college, it was really Jesus got a hold of my life in college, and I remember picking up the Ragamuffin Gospel by Brennan Manning, which is kind of a classic, dude. But for me, and I think there were probably a variety of things going on in my life, my story in that season, but just he had a way, Brennan Manning had a way of talking about grace that took it from being, it wasn't like this abstract concept. It was
Yeah.
like life, dude, just reality,
Mm,
like grace in a way that popped in Technicolor and just grabbed a hold of your heart. And that felt like he was putting language to what I had as a new Christian, like, just experienced, I mean, when
yeah.
part of my journey coming to faith, like, if there was one word I remember just bouncing around going, "It's grace, it's great," like, grace,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
which kinda, like, I'd say, it sounds like you read my second book, The Pursuing God, but
Yep.
it was
Yep.
really, like, just my attempt to kinda re-engage that whole theme of going like, "Man, this is not" what happened in my story, in short, was, like, Jesus going, Josh, you thought this was about you coming out to find me. And the reality is I've been the one coming out to find you?
Yes.
And where I had kind of ended high school and early college, said, okay, I'm going to try this God thing, and got to start doing all this stuff, like reading the Bible and prayer gathering and leading worship and like evangelism, like all this stuff. And yet just feeling completely empty and emptier inside, and going, this is not working. And yet, feel like I had to keep doing all this stuff so I didn't
Mm,
disappoint people around me who were now like, look at Josh, he's on fire for Jesus, this new believer. And dude, I don't think I'd actually really encountered grace yet. Dude, it was like I was
yeah.
just, here's my way to perform and find acceptance and belonging by doing all the Christian stuff and whatever in this new crowd of people I'm around. And getting to the end of it and just going, no, this isn't working. And God, forget it. Like if this is who you are, I want nothing to do with you. And it wasn't until actually kind of rejecting that, what I thought was Christianity and getting honest with God and kind of the vulnerability to go, forget it. This is, yeah. It wasn't until I'd kind of let go of that I had this encounter with Jesus and just Jesus going, yeah,
Man.
you thought this was about you pursuing me. It's not, dude. It's about me pursuing you, and
Amen.
that kind of flipped my world upside down. And it was that next year that somehow, I can't remember how I got a hold of it. I got a hold of Ragamuffin Gospel. And even just from the intro, I can still almost remember his intro, dude. Like, this is not a book for I can't remember exactly but the high performing, whatever,
Yep. Yep.
this is for the broken and bedraggled and beat up and Jesus falling off their cracker and whatever else. And, yeah, so that one got a hold of my heart in a big way early on and put
Absolutely.
language to grace that just helped it come alive and solidify. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is a I think one of the most transformative books for me in general, but also just like I don't know, I put him in the category. say Manning, and I always bring him up just about every episode, but in the same category as like a Eugene Peterson, like somebody who just
Yes.
writes with compassion that is just undeniable on every single page. Like this relationship that they
Yeah.
have with Jesus is something that if you read their books and you're like, not really sure. I don't know how you do that. Like I want what
Yeah.
they have like just dripping off the pages. I absolutely love
Yes.
that. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, man. Is there kind of as you're thinking through that book, is there something in particular? I think like grace being probably that main theme, but is there something from it that just kind of like shifted that understanding for you? I know, like you said, the whole idea of grace in general, but is there something in there that kind of shifted from where you were to where you were at the end of that?
Sorry, it kind of froze up. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Oh, it did freeze for a minute.
Oh,
I
there we
think I'm
go.
back.
Oh, now
I
I
think I'm
can hear
back.
you. Sorry.
No, no, you're
Yeah.
fine.
So yeah, it froze up right when you were asking the question. Do you mind asking the question again?
Absolutely. You got
I
it.
heard everything with like Eugene Peterson and all, but yeah, at the end when you were, yeah.
No, that's all good. All good. Yeah, I was just saying, is there like a specific moment from that book? I know grace kind of being the overarching theme, but like, was there a moment from the book that kind of like stuck out to you that you recall, or maybe not?
Yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting to go back and reread that one now,
Yeah.
but the gist of it, well, okay, here's one of the things that struck me was uh Grace, maybe the way I put it right now is like Grace had grit, you know? Like
Yep. Yep.
Manning had kind of this like fire to him where you think about Grace, and I feel like often today it can be kind of like hey, it's all good, just whatever, like
Yep.
almost like lethargically. Like for Manning, Grace confronted the junk in our world,
Mm,
and I was used to maybe Grace confronting the lawless side of like, "Oh, I'm just going and living all these ways that are leading to like destruction in my life. Like I'm habits and patterns and things that are destroying me." Grace kind of sets me free from those things. That part kind of made more sense to me. But with Manning, Grace confronted legalism, and
mm,
it kind of like there's a fire in his bones that I think resonates with when you see Jesus just going at it
yeah.
toe to toe with the Pharisees and whatnot, um, and how the love of God actually confronts our attempts to polish ourselves up, to perform for approval, to um, be the upright and uptight kind of whatever,
Yeah.
who think
Yep.
we got all our stuff together. And I think we can kind of like, it's easy sometimes in Christian circles to go, uh, I don't know, to confront the negative behaviors we see in society around us, but like to see like almost as strong, almost a stronger emphasis, like, dude, judgment begins with the house of God. And it's not just this like, oh, God's uptight because you're not keeping his rules trying. It's like, no, the love of God burns like a fire through the religious hypocrisy and polished facades and kind of performance stuff that we put up to try and make ourselves think that we're really good on our own, whatever. And in our own, like in my own heart, still to this day, I continually need like the refining love of God to confront the ways that I'm maybe being good, but not being honest, if that makes sense. Like I'm kind of doing the stuff, but my heart is harboring idols. And yeah, I don't know. And so just Manning, like, dude, it's like, dude, grace is a fire that wants to burn away all the dross and confront the junk in me. And just there was this like desperation clinging to Jesus. One story all these years later, I mean, it's been like over 2 decades now. But one of the stories I remember really standing out was like where he had gone into a cave for 6 months with no human contact, right? And like
Yeah.
just kind of
Yeah.
crazy, which seems
Yep.
like really like, ooh, highfalutin spiritual, whatever. But like the desperation he came out of that, just hungry for Jesus. I can't even remember exactly
Yes.
all the ins and outs of the story, but just that like there was kind of this pattern of his religious performance in different areas of his life, not leading to spiritual exaltation, but rather like awareness of his own desperation and depravity and need for a God whose grace could meet him in the muck and the mire of his own heart,
Yeah.
and even knowing more about Manning since then and just his own struggles and stuff with alcoholism and different things that you could just see um, a man desperate for the grace and love of God in the midst of an
Absolutely.
unflinching awareness of his own brokenness.
Yes, yes. I don't
Yeah,
think I don't think I could put it any better than that. I think that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
heart of Manning in general is just incredible. So I really appreciate that. When it comes to, just to kind of shift gears a little bit, when it comes to your new book that you've got out, God
yeah,
is on your side. First off, I have to say, and I mean this, I hope
yeah,
this is taken well. I read the title at
yeah,
first and I was like, I don't
yeah.
know, like that doesn't sound
Yes,
100%.
totally.
Yes, completely agreed. God is
Yes,
on your side.
totally, dude.
But at first I was like, is this really like a Josh Butler book? Like, I'm not sure.
Yes,
Oh my
yes.
goodness, such a good book, like truly, genuinely such a good book. And I encourage people to check that out. One of the things that I was interested in kind of reading through it, so you're breaking down the Gospel
Yeah,
of John, which incredible, and you did an awesome job with that. But one of the things that I've always found refreshing and really helpful about your writing is the fact that you take like kind of these complex theological ideas. We're going to go through the whole book of John and kind of boil it down into a way that everybody can read it, that it's accessible. And so one of the questions I had for you is just what was probably the biggest challenge, I would say, balancing the depth and clarity as you're writing this big book. It's on this big topic.
yeah. Totally, man. Well, a couple thoughts. First off, even I'm glad you brought on the title, because I had wrestled a little bit with like decided to go with it, but the question of, at first glance, God is on your side, that can sound like you're saying, dude, God just endorses everything you do, and kind of
Yeah.
a message that's prominent in our culture today. If you do you and God's great, he's just kind of patting your back and giving you a massage while you go do whatever you want to, like, and so not wanting to communicate that, but kind of going like, actually to take a phrase that can sound maybe almost like a cliche at times in our culture, and actually flip it a bit or load it with like where you go into the book with one perception and you come out of the book with almost like a whole different perception. And so the idea
Absolutely.
there, kind of what I like of the spatial imagery with God is on your side, like dude, God being spatially close on your side kind of thing, that I wanted to weave in with John's gospel is, dude, essentially right out of the gate, John's introduction, Jesus is the word become flesh, meaning he is the creator who has entered onto your side of creation. He's the lamb. You take
Amen.
in John 1, he says, to Nathaniel, you'll see the angels of God ascending, descending. Essentially going, Jesus is the ascended one who brings his side of heaven onto your side of earth, in you and through you. And so, right out of the gate, the introduction of John's gospel, John is going, dude, Jesus is the God who has entered onto your side to be in it with you, to fight for you, to work in you, to work through you. Like, man, that spatial imagery actually maps really well into it. And it kind of
Absolutely.
moves it from, you do you, God just wants to rub your back while you go live your life however you see fit,
Yep.
to actually know, like, Jesus is the God who has entered onto your side. Yes, to confront you, chapter 2, get right
Sure,
pretty
sure.
early on into just some of the
Yep.
confronting of stuff. But in order, and even to say that, like, um, even when Jesus confronts you, he's out to set you free. That, like, dude, I love what it ends up doing for me, that kind of God is on your side language is going like, oh, it's not to say God doesn't confront, but when he confronts even that fire, it's his goal is to set you free. Like Karl Barth
Absolutely.
has this quote I love of God's no is always embedded within his bigger yes,
Mm,
meaning God's no to your sin is embedded within his bigger yes to your humanity. And what I hope the reader comes out with it by the end of the book is going, man, even when even when it feels like God's against me, I can trust that he's doing something bigger that's ultimately for me, you know, and
Amen.
I share a lot
Amen.
of stories in the book and just my own life, some more recent, some ages ago, earlier in my story, but
Yeah.
try and share a lot of vignettes, different episodes from my own life where I have not felt like God's on my side, where it feels like, dude, God, are you are you destroying me right now? You know, like it feels like you're
Yeah.
tearing up some things that I hold really dear, you know, and yet, and being able to be honest and grapple through
Mm,
those root feelings in those seasons, you know, and bring those before the Lord and grapple through them. But being able to attest on the other side of all those, like, dude, those have been, even when it didn't feel like in the moment, those have been some of the areas where I think God's done the deepest formation and where
yes.
I've most truly discovered, encountered God being more on my side than I dreamed in the very areas that felt the most painful at the moment, you know?
Absolutely. No, I love that. I appreciate it, man. Yeah. Well, and it was funny because, like I said, I saw it online and I was like, well, I'm
Yeah.
gonna buy it because I know it's gonna be good. Like that's the first thing. But then secondarily, I was looking at it and I was like, after reading it, genuinely had that thought where I was like, man, what a genius idea to name the book something that kind of feels I'm like kind of feels the most accessible title that there is. Like it's very like
Yeah.
culturally God is on your side. I was like, yeah, like who's gonna gripe against that? But then immediately you get into it and you're like, oh yeah, this is truly, and especially knowing like the bits and pieces that I know of your story and kind of the difficulties that you've gone through and reading through the book, all of that, like man, what a cool story. So yeah, thank you for writing it first off, but definitely,
That's
definitely, I
awesome.
think it's a cool title that at first I was like, what? Like, but I get it. I do. I definitely do.
Yes, totally, man.
So,
Well, and one other
yeah,
thought too is you
yeah.
mentioned, you know, what was most challenging.
Hmm.
And I think one was trying to balance so one of the themes in the book biblically, kind of where the idea for this one started with me was really theologically like John's use of the Old Testament. And so it's kind of
Mm,
this in kind of biblical studies terms, it would be like intertextuality, like how do different texts of the Bible kind of interact with and play off of each other. And I've always loved and been fascinated by New Testament use of the Old Testament. There was a scholar, Richard Hayes, that back in the day was pretty well known for like echoes of scripture in the Gospels, or echoes of scripture in Paul's letters, and echoes of scripture meaning echoes of the Old Testament Hebrew story in
absolutely.
New
Yeah.
Testament context. And that stuff always just fascinated me. And with John, dude, I feel like one of my convictions is, dude, you can be a brand new baby believer and read the Gospel of John and like, whoa, this is amazing. But I can be like now a few decades into following Jesus, and I read John, and even like, dude, I had just finished the book, or you know, after it just got published, and I saw two more things that I hadn't seen before. I'm like, oh, I wish I had put that in the book, but dude, but where those light bulb moments come on, like the deeper waters of John, where it's like, dude, you're seeing it in Technicolor now. I believe it's in the Old Testament backdrop. Like when you see the Old Testament echoes that John is
Yeah.
riffing off of and is narrating these stories in the life of Jesus against, that's where boom, like it's like you're seeing the same thing that you just saw, but now like from a whole like multi-dimensional whatever, dude, like a whole other um yeah, it just pops at whole new levels that, yeah, it's no longer just kind of a one-dimensional thing.
Definitely.
Now it's like, whoa, dude, at the end of the day going like, oh, I am in the story. Like I am the woman at the well looking at Jesus, looking at me. You know, I am the dude who's been paralyzed for 38 years and Jesus comes and offers his hand saying, do you want to get well? I am the woman caught in adultery. You know, I am the temple that has to get torn down because like I am Peter in need of restoration. You know, I am Barabbas getting exchanged for. And it's, I think, against when you see the Old Testament backdrop and echoes, it's not just like, oh, that's cool information, you know, like kind
Yep.
of cool
Yep.
ideas. It's like, oh, now I'm finding myself in this story. Like I am encountering Jesus encountering me, you know?
Absolutely.
And so I think trying to interplay that. So one of the biggest challenges was trying to interplay both the theological kind of exegetical stuff that really carried depth, but tried to write it accessibly that drew the reader into seeing Jesus seeing them, you know? So trying to be both
Yes.
theological depth and kind of a congregational accessibility.
Sure, sure. No,
Yeah.
and you did a great
Yeah.
job of that. One of the things, and I don't want to, not going to spoil anything from the book, but one of the things that really struck me, I don't know how in, I don't know, 10, 12 years of pastoring now, but how I've never made that connection to Jesus's first miracle, the wine at the wedding, and my goodness, what a cool, I loved that. The whole book
Yeah.
incredible, but going through that, I was like, oh my goodness, I've never thought about it this way. And it is that side of John where you're like, yeah, I think I read it when I was like 12 for the first time because it was what we did, and you learn it and you got it. I got who Jesus
Yeah.
was in that story. But then to reread it and go through it again and understand more and more, my goodness, it does. The whole Bible has that capability, but John uniquely set in such a way that he's tying together all of these Old Testament narratives, and he's telling this, I would say, while still literally true stories of Jesus, he's also telling them with a theological bent that the other
Yes.
gospels just don't have that like completionistic look of scripture that John does. He had more time to work on it, so that helps. But but man, like just a beautiful picture that's painted there. So I really appreciate it, man. I think that's awesome. One of the other questions that I had based on your book, and then we'll jump back into other books and get back into that side of things. But I think, like you were talking about, that theological depth, keeping that in the midst of things. How is it? And you started to answer this a little bit, but I want to dig just a little bit deeper into it. But I think you're somebody who writes for modern audience. I don't know what the average age of your readers are. I have no clue. But with that being said, I know a
Sure.
lot of people, millennials such as myself, have definitely we've loved your work. And so how do you kind of
Thanks.
balance, yeah, of course. How do you balance that
Yep.
theological depth with this like God is for us theme that is in there, and also these languages and stories? How do you balance all of that for kind of the skeptical reader? Because I think that's something you've
Yes.
done really well throughout all of your works. But how do you find
Yeah.
that balance in there?
Definitely, man. Well, okay, a couple thoughts. One is, dude, same thing I try and do with preaching is, well, okay, with two thoughts. First is part of my inroad into writing books, originally was writing music and used to write kind of songwriting, just whatever, as a high school, college. But then in writing worship music, even, and one of the things that happens in worship, just music in general, songwriting, is you have to try and condense ideas into a very short time. You've only got so many lyrics to work with, Yeah. And that's one of the things that was helpful for me is like, I was like an avid reader, kind of, I don't know, I could go the route of being stuck in an ivory tower with libraries of books all around me, just
Sure,
be
sure.
happy and content to live in. And
Yep.
I think there's a place for academia and that kind of
Totally. Yep.
abstract world, but often you hear those folks talk and it's just, it's going
Yep.
over the head
Yep.
for most of it. It's like,
Yep.
because you've got reasons for that, their own language, someone who's a
Oh, totally.
PhD in scientific field, they know all these verbs, or I mean, they know verbiage, terms that represent these whole big concepts. They can interact with those at a high level. Um, and so there's that world, which there's a part of me, just my personality is really drawn to, but then there's also part of me that is very relational and kind of in the trenches and just loves people and pastoral, like just in life with people and wanting to, dude, what is the significance of that idea? What does it mean? How does it
Yeah.
hit home
Yep.
for these folks that I love and I'm in life with, and going, there's I think a work of love is trying to translate from the ivory
Mm,
tower into the trenches of real life, and that's where I get the most excited, is trying to do that work of translation in some ways. So reading the Oxford Press, like thick
yep.
academic
Yep.
stuff, and then trying to write in a way that it hits home. And what songwriting did for me, I think part of it was the power of a metaphor. Like,
Yes.
I think if you can find the right image or a metaphor that visually in people's imagination, they can kind of see it, it just pops at a whole other level that would otherwise take pages and pages of explanation, description to try and explain,
Absolutely.
So I mean, even you mentioned the wedding at Cana, and one illustration and metaphor I think I used in there, I got from a buddy of mine. I think I cited him in the end note, a guy named Luke, but was on John's signs, and like going like, dude, if I was driving my kids to Disneyland and 180 miles outside of town, like we pull off on the side of the road in the desert, and there's like a sign that says Disneyland 180 miles, I'd
Yeah.
be like, pull out the picnic blanket and pull out the stuff or whatever, and like, we're here, my kids would be so disappointed. Like, what are you doing, Dad? Like,
Yeah.
why,
Yeah.
don't stop at the sign. Like, you want to get to the destination. And that simple metaphor of going like, dude, for John's gospel, like the point is not, oh, whoa, Jesus did this cool sign, made water, wine, at a wedding in Cana. That's like pulling out the picnic blanket
Yep.
out at the road sign. It's like, no,
Yep.
the sign is intended to point you to something much bigger. Let's explore how Jesus' wedding at Cana, it's actually a picture of the wedding supper of the Lamb, like the
Amen.
consummation of all history. Revelation 21:22, Jesus is giving a sign pointing to where his ministry is heading, like the destination of the whole deal.
Yeah.
My point being, I could talk for pages about the now and not yet, and the eschatological parousia of the Trinitarian kingdom that's going to come, blah, like all these like abstract concepts. But the simple
Absolutely.
metaphor of like stopping at the sign versus like keep going to the destination, like the power of metaphor can do in a few sentences there what would otherwise take pages to unpack. So okay. So the first thing I think, was, to your question, how songwriting uh, helped cultivate in me a love for the power of metaphor to
Absolutely. Yeah.
finding the right image can do a lot of that work of translation pretty quickly. But there's a craft to finding the right metaphors and illustration.
Yeah. There
And the
definitely is.
second, totally. The second thing, I'd say there's a bit of a trick of the trade, if you will, a structure that I found really helpful years ago, dude. I heard there's a preacher, Brian Loritz, who I love. I think he's an amazing communicator. And it was kind of this preaching conference thing. But he was, he, he goes, dude, explain, illustrate, apply. Explain, illustrate, apply. As far as like structure for how to communicate, like you explain the idea, you illustrate the idea, then you apply the idea. That flow generally is like just how our minds work to receive information, for my reader.
Absolutely.
And so one of the things that I try and force myself to do, both in sermons as well as in books, once you know it, like I walk our preaching team and teaching team and stuff here through it. And afterwards, and they're like, oh, now when I hear you preaching, I can see what you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, the other side of the coin is like, dude, if you read my books with that in mind, like you'll also start to see the same deal. So every chapter,
Amen.
there's often kind of this rhythm where I'm like explaining the text and then illustrating the idea from the text and then applying it. So it'll kind of be like, since we're on Wedding at Cana, I'd be like, um, uh explaining oh, he chooses the 6 jars for ceremonial washing. Well, that's Old Testament ritual impurity, purity, clean, unclean, kind of explaining like what these things were. But then illustrating, dude, you used to get washed with water, now you get washed with wine. Meaning like, dude, part of what this is doing is it's Jesus is pointing to how his sacrificial death is now going to change the game. So the imagery of like, I don't know, I think I know like Clorox bleach or people doing like the things that we do to kind of purify today. cold baths and whatever, milk baths and whatever else, versus like, dude, getting what it means to get washed, cleansed with the wine. And then the application going, dude, you can't get Jesus dirty. He can only make you clean. His death
Amen.
is able to cleanse and atone all our sin, all our impurity, all our unrighteousness. You can bring, dude, you may think your stuff is too much for him, but that's why he made 180 gallons. It's like,
Yep.
dude, there's more than
Yep.
enough to go around. You may think that yours is not strong, like your stuff is too strong, uh, but dude, his blood is strong enough. Yeah, drawing all that out of the story. Summary though being, like, I found that structure really helpful, whether I'm writing a book or a sermon, or a book or a sermon, is like that rhythm. Often within a chapter, there will probably be about 6 to 8 movements of explaining something, illustrating it, and applying it for the reader. And I used to do more like, I'd explain a ton, and then I'd kind of illustrate a bit, and then I'd apply, like, every chapter would maybe be like one of those kind of
Yep.
thing. Like, I
Yep.
think more in skeleton, some of that. But what I've tried to do, I think, in growing in the craft of writing, over time, has been
Sure.
to
Sure.
have those be quicker movements, where it's like you're moving through those things more quickly, just helping the reader, absorb
Actually, yeah.
in a way that the mind can absorb more readily.
Totally. And I think our quickening attention spans probably don't help that any if I had to
Yes.
throw my thought out there. So I think that helps.
Yes.
No, it's awesome, man. Yeah, I really do. I can't say enough. I really do love the book. I think people should check it out. The Party Crasher, I know, is one that I have probably recommended that book more than anything else in the past couple of years. And
Wow.
lots of if you're someone listening and dealing with I can't imagine anyone listening is dealing with any political stress in life right now, because there's just nothing
No, there's
going
none
on.
of that going on
No,
anymore.
no.
Yeah.
So, but if you are the one, I think that book is an incredible look at politics and how we should handle that as the church, and really grateful for that in my ministry. So yeah, well, dude, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Kind of a couple last few questions to jump into when it comes to books that you didn't write necessarily. But a couple other books. Is there one that has given you words? And I think kind of what you said about Brennan Manning is probably similar to that. But is there a book that's given you words to something that you'd always felt, but you didn't know how to express before reading it in such a way?
That's a great question. Well, maybe, it'd be interesting, even like some of the stuff I'm reading right now, recently, might speak to that a bit. One, well, yeah, maybe I'll go a couple different angles here.
Sure.
Some stuff I've been reading lately. So my daughter and I did a road trip recently, kind of a long distance road trip, and we did some audiobooks on the way, which I usually don't listen to audiobooks. Like I usually am, a hard copy. But for the road trip, one that people had recommended a while ago, my wife had loved, was Unbroken, story of Louis Zamperini. And so that was a little more biography, and dude, oh man, it was so powerful. I think one of the things that it put words to was just, dude, it's kind of a survival story. So if you're not familiar, it's a real story based on a true story. He, World War II, plane gets shot down in the middle of the ocean, and he survives like 46 days in a life raft. So the opening of the book, the opening scene is, he's underneath the raft in the ocean with like swarms of sharks coming at him, and Japanese bomber plane overhead, like trying to shooting holes in his raft or whatever.
My goodness,
and you're just going, what the heck? How did this guy get here? Where is this thing going? Oh man. But it's a dude, and then he survives in internment camps for POW camps and all. And dude, the stuff the guy goes through, and it's a true story, is just insane,
It is, yeah.
but it's, I think the piece that puts words to through narrating his experience is like resilience, dude, the resilience of
absolutely
the human spirit, the ability to go through really difficult things, getting your tail kicked over and over and over and over, and to keep on getting back, like Chumbawamba, dude. I
Yeah.
can't get knocked down and get up again. Right? He just keeps getting
Yes.
back up, man.
Yeah.
And it was so inspiring on that front. That was so good. And then the other one we listened to, fiction. So I honestly, I need to do more fiction. It's one of those things
Yeah.
where I've got a stack of all the books I want to read that are nonfiction, but I do need more fiction. But we listened to Project Hail Mary, a newer one that I've heard there's a movie coming out about it now, but like someone had recommended it, and dude, it was so good. It's like basically a guy wakes up in outer space alone, abandoned on the ship, and it's as his memories start coming back, he's got one problem to solve after another to survive. And as each one gets solved, you're kind of learning more how he got here, what's going on, and sort of this
Man.
epic rescue mission he's on to kind of save the universe, if you will, like, and it's one of those, I think a few things that are so interesting about it is kind of the problem solving aspect of like every chapter feels like there's a new sort of dilemma, which I think there's something in us that wants a problem to solve. Like I used to, when my kids were younger, I would make up stories for them every night. And it's funny because they had the same pattern every time. I would just make them up off the cuff, but it had the same pattern. It was always like first, like, character and setting, or, like there was Dominic the Donut, whatever, and he lived in the land of something, and this or whatever, But the phrase, usually within the first few sentences, the phrase would be, and then there was
Yep.
a problem, but then there was a problem, but then there was a problem, there was a
Enter
problem.
the conflict.
And just going, exactly, dude, you're introducing conflict, and there's some kind of issue, that has to be tackled. And they were hooked, dude. My kids were always hooked.
Yeah.
And so they'll still say that now today, dude. My daughter and I were watching a movie recently where the character said something like, uh-oh, now there's a problem, and she turned to me and looked like, and then there was a problem, like they just know, like, okay, there's something to conflict. And I think that's because we live in a Genesis 3 world. Genesis 1 and 2 is like setting and characters and all that. But then there was a problem, dude. Like there's this problem in the story of the human race and the world. And the biblical story is rising tension, attempting to deal with, like God dealing with and us failing to deal with her, like the problem of the heart of the human race. I'm off track here. Back to Project Hail Mary. It echoed that, with like the series of escalated problems in a storyline that keeps getting bigger and bigger and more momentous. And you're kind of learning with the lead character, like he's learning at the same time you are, like
Oh, man,
what
yeah.
is the bigger story that he's a part of and built into, So anyways, so those come to mind, kind of putting language to things one in a biographical way, another in a metaphorical, fictional way. But another book that, in preparation for writing God is on Your Side, one of the key authors I've been reading a ton of is Mary Karr, Karr.
Okay. Yeah.
And for those who may not be familiar with, she's widely considered the queen of memoir. So has written a ton of like New York Times bestselling memoirs. She's not writing as a Christian writer. I think my understanding is actually, I think she became Catholic in more recent years, has had kind of
cool.
but that was not a part of her story when she's writing, and or at least for her first few books. And she wrote a book called The Art of Memoir that is widely considered the go-to book. If you're going to do memoir, like read this to figure out. So I'm not switching over to memoir per se, but when I was writing God is on Your Side, I was integrating a lot more vulnerable elements of my own personal story in it, so part of reading Mary Karr was just trying to get a grip on, how do you do this well? More than any of so you've read my other books, more than any of my other books, this one has a lot more of me, my own personal narrative and stuff in it, So I read some of her memoirs as well as her Art of Memoir on how to write memoir. And one of the things that really struck me, I mean, it sounds basic, but if I were to put it into my own just summary, two main things that I took away from her art of memoir. One was lead with your pain,
Mm-hmm.
like, don't lead with your trophies, dude, lead with your scars, lead with your pain. Going like that, it creates vulnerability with the reader. And it's not saying, hey, here's some cheap trick you can use to whatever,
Sure,
like
sure.
win an audience. But it's saying, dude, it takes a certain courage and raw honesty to bring your pain to the table, and so
Absolutely. Yeah.
so knows and God is on your side, dude. Like pretty much every chapter like is open, the intro and every chapter opens with some kind of just basically like I remember brainstorming, okay, what are the gnarliest
Yep.
most
Yep.
challenging parts of my life, that I could if I were to really get raw and vulnerable with. And so that, and the other piece I took away from her was lead with your mistakes, where don't make yourself the hero in the story. And I get that, like in sermons, that's been the case, but she, uses an example where in one of her memoirs, she writes about her divorce and she talks about the temptation in her process of writing that section of the memoir. The temptation was, here's all the ways my husband was a jerk who wounded me and da da da, but what she ended up doing, becoming convicted of, was to write. She kind of opens that section way more like, here's all the ways I was a horrible wife and all the mistakes I made, and
Mm.
here's why I was the problem,
Yep. Yep.
and dude, you're reading it and just going like, oh wow, like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is giving me permission. It was like another version of the Brendan Manning stuff, dude. Like, this is giving me permission to bring my own junk into the open because
Mm.
I actually believe that grace is there to catch me. There's something about her
Amen.
writing, and it doesn't surprise me. I'm at a part in her last memoir where it's starting to dig into the faith element in conversation, and I'm going, dude, I get it. Like, sure, her encounter with God seems related to this unflinching honesty with her own brokenness, and that she's not just doing that in a private corner or confessional somewhere. She's
Sure.
doing that publicly before the world as an author, writing about it, dude, just putting all the junk out there on the table.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I think like that has been pretty inspiring for me in this most recent season with both um writing as well as preaching, I don't know, I think there's a whole conversation around preaching, the question of vulnerability, like you don't want to be processing all your junk
Yeah.
in the
It's not
moment with,
therapy,
but
but
yeah, not using the congregation as therapy. But you
exactly. Yes.
also, I think, but to go back to even our Brendan Manning piece earlier, and what I'm finding Mary Carr is like, there is, with wisdom, there are ways to lead with your pain, lead with your mistakes in a way that highlights and emphasizes the sovereign goodness and grace of God, like that
Amen.
you're
Yeah.
not the hero in the story. Like you and I are um, the recipients in need of this gracious, merciful, pursuing God who comes after us.
Yeah.
Yeah, even in the midst of our own not having all our stuff together.
No, absolutely. I had someone come up a couple, and I hadn't said anything that I recall that was all that vulnerable in any real sense. It was basically just a normal sermon, and I said whatever. I don't recall. And I had someone come up and she said, "Hey, I've been going to church for 40 years," and she was like, "I've never heard a pastor say that before. That was really cool." And I was like, "Man, I guess it, like thinking back." Yeah, I guess I haven't heard a lot of pastors talk about their failings, but like at the same time,
Yeah.
like the news, you
Yeah.
turn the news on any day and you'll see plenty of
Yeah.
pastors' failings. They exist. We're clearly not
Yes.
perfect people. But man, maybe they're like, to me, I was like, maybe there's something to, and I think many people have talked about it recently, but like leading with that humility, honesty, I am not the guy, I think is just an important thing in the first place. But past that, I think there's a good, again, not to say it's a perfect system, but a good safeguard against a lot of the other things. Because when you feel as a pastor, and I know we have some pastors listening as well, but when you feel as a pastor that you have to be performatively perfect at all times, not only does that usually lead to not so great preaching that doesn't connect so well, but more importantly, potentially is the reality of like, if you start to believe that, all of a sudden you end up on the news, the next one of the the many that are out there. Like, I think there's something to that genuine humility in just saying, look, I've screwed up. Here's all the ways.
Yeah,
And I love that. I think that's super important.
totally, man. No, like maybe just piggyback on that. One of the chapters in the book is on John 4, the end where Jesus heals the official son.
Yes.
And actually the origin of that chapter was we were preaching through the Gospel of John years ago when, I share this story more in the book, but where I went blind in my right eye and the doctors were concerned that like I was likely going to lose my vision in my left eye that year as well. And so basically a year of facing the prospect of going blind, and go, man, what if I'm not able to see my kids' faces? They're growing up, not able to read books anymore the way I know how, not able to do life the way I know, my job. Yeah, there were so many fears. And I didn't get up the very first Sunday. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I'm going, like I'm freaking out. I'm going blind. But I did, I processed through it first with the Lord and with my wife and family and the counselor, just kind of like navigating it and whatnot. Pretty quickly. I mean, it was within, I think like 2 or 3 months where I brought the congregation in on, it was a sermon on this passage. And I shared pretty in depth on A, my own fears, but B, like the seeking to trust, like, yeah, God, I'm scared, but I'm going to trust you, and sharing it kind of in the context of this John 4 story and prayer, like, we talk, talking about that chapter and in that sermon about, healing, like the power of God to heal, but the reality that he doesn't always, and often doesn't. And, what do we do with that? And just raising a lot of those things. And anyways, my experience, pastorally that was probably the biggest catalyst, my perspective, in the prayer culture of our church shifting.
Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
like something about the vulnerability with my own, whatever, bringing from the Lord, like there was a spiritual climate change when it came to there was like almost like a renewal prayer movement in our church that
Absolutely. Yeah.
took off. And it's probably, a variety of reasons, but that to me was the biggest catalyst. And I think part of it was, again, that modeling of through some real vulnerability, like that
Absolutely.
became suddenly like, whoa, we can bring our fears and our medical conditions and the stuff we're doing. Like we can really pray boldly, even if it doesn't get answered, the way that we thought.
Absolutely.
So I don't know, there was
Yeah.
just so much that came out of that I think, yeah.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I think it is powerful and necessary quite often. It's easy to just kind of get comfortable in church, and I think some of the uncomfortability is, I mean, you open the Bible, there's no lack of uncomfortability in those pages. So it's funny
Yes.
that we often shy away, but we can't. I think that's huge. So my last big question I got for you is my favorite question to ask. I ask it
Yes.
every episode, but it is, if you could put one book in the hands of every Christian, not every person, but every Christian, what book would it be?
Yeah, man. The one that I just right now, I'm kind of thinking of actually, because I don't know if I've ever really like drilled down and thought like, hey, here's the one. But just thinking right now, I think I would say Athanasius's On the Incarnation. It's the book On the
Absolutely.
Incarnation
Yep.
by Athanasius, early church father. And here's some of the reasoning why is one, it's just an amazing killer book,
Yeah.
if you read my book, The Pursuing God, like it's actually a central influence in that book. But two, I really think that we could use being more historically rooted, as I'm assuming most of our listeners, are like me, kind of Protestants, generally low church context or whatever, which is fine, which is great. But one of the dangers there can be not being as historically rooted. And there's something about digging into the historic church. For me, one of the foundational influences in my theological development and formation was reading a ton of the early church fathers. I had
Mm,
some coursework I did in seminary and after, where I found myself digging into the patristics, the Cappadocian fathers, Athanasius, Irenaeus, Augustine, other figures from that period, and just my mind getting blown. There was a way of reading scripture. Side note, God is on your side, actually, the new book. Some of what I'm trying to do with John's use of the Old Testament is really stuff I picked up, I think, intuitively from the early church fathers. And they can get
absolutely.
critiqued a lot today of like, oh, they're just allegorizing and whatever else. But I actually think they're
Sure.
often way more brilliant than we know. They're doing stuff that's actually more um, sophisticated. I think sometimes the critiques that get leveled as like, oh, they're just reading into things allegorically, is because they're actually playing chess when we're playing checkers,
Yep.
And what I mean
Yep.
by that, let me give one example. I remember reading back in the day, like some early church fathers might say something like, Rahab at Jericho, she throws the scarlet cord out her window, and to signify to the invading, Israelites coming in, um, that that's a sign. Don't mess with her house, right? And the early church fathers would go, see the scarlet cord she threw out. That's a sign. It's a foreshadowing of the blood of Christ. Like the blood of Christ, which now
Yep.
covers our
Yep.
sins, so that we don't get destroyed around with her. And people going, oh my gosh, they're just reading it. It's just a red cord. It's a historical detail about a red cord, and you're suddenly making it like point to the gospel of Jesus, the whole thing. You're reading too much into it. Um, okay, well, that's because we're playing checkers. But you start playing chess and you go to like the intertextuality theme we were looking at earlier, and the language that's used of the scarlet cord is the same phrasing terminology that's used earlier in the Exodus, when the Israelites put the red blood over their doorposts, so that when the avenging angel comes over and the destruction happens, that their house is covered and they don't, whatever, like they don't get caught up in the destruction. And it's also the same language that's used in Leviticus for atonement ceremonies, and ceremonies that are dealing with sin and impurity and whatnot. And so the early church fathers are picking up on this, and they're going like, okay, when Rahab does the scarlet cord, they're seeing the intertextuality of going, that is tied to the blood of the lamb over the doorpost that protects you from coming destruction. And it's also
Amen.
tied to the Levitical system of sacrificial atonement that's going to cover you, which is then tied very clearly to the blood of Christ in the New Testament through the gospel. So, boom, they're just not showing all their
Got
work, but like,
everything.
dude,
Yeah.
they're right.
Yup.
Like Rahab's scarlet cord is a foreshadowing of the blood of Jesus that covers us from sin and prevent, like, so there's so many areas where it's like, I have seen too often, I think, superficial readings of the early church fathers that dismiss them. Whereas actually, if you immerse yourself I'm not saying that every whatever early
Sure.
church
Sure.
interpretation of passages, without critique, but I am saying there's a way of reading scripture that was much more prominent, or is much more prominent, I think, in those readings than can be in contemporary low church American evangelicalism. That when you
Definitely. Yeah.
start to saturate in it, your mind starts to see connections in a fresh new way. And so I think there's some
Absolutely.
powerful, whether it's Athanasius or Augustine's Confessions. For other reasons, I think is amazing. And but
Yes.
I would be a fan of yeah, it's Athanasius. It's early church, but it's also short and pretty accessible. It can be a good gateway inroad to getting a taste for, yeah, the early
Absolutely.
church as a beautiful resource for us as the church today.
No, totally. I appreciate that because yeah, I have joked. I was like, I want to go survey as many evangelicals as I can and ask them, what do you know about? I've got to find a better way to pose the question, not just church history, because that's a little too keyed in, maybe. But I feel like the answer I would get, having talked to many people through this, is like, well, my church has been around for 21 years, and we started as a church plant of this denomination or whatever else, and broke off about 6 years ago, whatever. Like, all of the church history has become like, well, my congregation in Houston, Texas is this. And you're like, well,
Yeah.
sure. And that's an important story. I don't want to downplay that there are really cool things that have happened. I mean, my church here, like I said, is like 60 years old. I came from a church that was 20 some years old, but that's just our local context. My denomination is a couple hundred years old. That's still a local context in its own right. This is part of this grand story that's thousands of years old. And I think a lot of people struggle to put that into words at the very minimum. So I think there's definitely some benefit to reading. Please read the church fathers. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I think so. I love it. Well, the last question I got for you is a pretty simple one. Are there any books that you're reading right now that you're excited about?
Yeah, so a couple. One is I've been reading some friends, different friends like doctoral work. It's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
fun kind of getting some folks who are doing deep dives on PhD dissertation stuff. So two that I've read recently, one friend is on the incarnation, like, would there have been an incarnation if there had been no sin? Like, kind of a classic
Yeah.
question on,
Yep.
is the incarnation a response to sin, or is it rooted in something deeper that would have happened anyways? And I've got my own take on it, but it was really fascinating. Like, dude, I mean, because for PhD level, he's got to go into all the best
Well, yeah.
understandings throughout history, approaches that, and it's actually more complicated. co- w- I don't know. Like, I initially went in going, my own would be that yes, the incarnation would have happened regardless of sin, but it's actually a really contested question in church history with some of the most brilliant minds and theologians going at it from different angles, and it became an interesting inroad even into what is the nature of sin, what is the heart of God, like, yeah, it opened up a ton of different windows, and even just looking at
Absolutely.
how different people were approaching that question from different angles. So that was really interesting. Another one on holiness, like the holiness of God in the Old Testament. There was a lot dealing with Leviticus and things of that nature. And I do think holiness can be a term that gets a bad rap these days because it's
Sure.
associated with self-righteousness or whatever. But it's not, dude. Like, the holiness of God is big. And even looking at in-depth stuff on some of the different definitions that people use
Well,
for
yeah.
holiness. Is it separateness, or is it the being of God? Man, there's just so many things that popped open on that, and how it confronts. Like, one of the biggest convictions I came away with in that one was God's agency is distinct and different from human agency, because he's
Mm,
the creator. It's like, dude, Tolkien's agency is different from Frodo's agency,
yep.
because as
Yep.
the author of as the creator, he's in a different relation to the story than the characters within the story. Like, he's
Absolutely.
not another character on the field of Middle Earth. He's, like, able to be present to all of Middle Earth's history and its characters, everything, like, simultaneously in a way that the characters themselves are not, so,
Yeah.
um, all that to say, like, which has big implications when you get into some of the theological discussions today around things like theodicy and suffering and evil and all, like,
Yep.
there
Yep.
are assumptions often baked in with some of the problems that contemporary folks have with God. I think that it's because we're treating God as just another player on the same field as us, and honestly, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But there's a lot of stuff where I think some dangerous or unhelpful directions that many in circles I'm around go theologically. And it's because it's almost like we have a kindergarten understanding of God's agency and not like a fully orbed, like, more biblical, robust understanding of, dude, once you accept that, dude, he's the creator and not creation, present to the whole story all the way, like you have a lot more. Yeah, yeah, when you get into issues of evil and suffering and destiny and all that kind of stuff, dude. Like, yeah, I think you can get a much higher vision of God that is not competing with human agency, but it's actually, yeah, really
Above it
freeing and
in that.
powerful. It
Yeah,
makes the world both
absolutely.
more mysterious and more God, more present, and yet more mysterious all at the same time. And maybe the final thought. Sorry, you asked one book. I'm throwing out a bunch, but
No,
another one
it's
I just
great.
finished recently is The Doctrine of Development by John Henry Newman,
Okay,
who
yeah.
fascinating dude. Like he's so he was
Yes.
just recently named in the Catholic Church a doctor of the church, which is big. I think there's only like 48 or 49 doctors historically. So you got like Augustine and Aquinas and Anselm, that crowd. He got lifted up into that realm. And it was interesting. I had read this last year too, his Apologia Pro Vita Sua, which is basically um well, yeah, those two books were really fascinating. So I'm not Catholic, but I have learned a ton from friends who are, and
Sure, sure.
learned a ton from authors, like authors and all. And one of the things that's fascinating, his doctrine, development of doctrine thesis, in short, he had been Anglican, became Catholic, but I guess here's the big takeaway. He had said earlier in his life, there was this conviction that, hey, if you want to get to the purest form of the church, purest form of
Mm,
doctrine, go back to the original story, go back to the New Testament, go back to whatever, which as a good Protestant, I'm that way too. Like, dude, let's get back
yep.
to the
Yep.
text, back to the New Testament, back to
Yep.
the sources. But what a shift that he had that I find really intriguing, and I'm kind of processing right now, is that what we find, say in the New Testament, for example, is more like a seed
Yep.
rather than the final product, right? And so
Mm,
that seed unfolds and grows throughout time in a way that's always consistent with what was implicit
with the
internally
plan.
within the
Yeah.
seed,
Yep.
but unfolds as an outgrowth of it. So, for example, if we take the Trinity, like we don't find the explicit doctrine of the Trinity stated explicitly as a doctrine in the New Testament. We don't find one person or three persons, one substance. We don't find the Greek language of like hypostasis and ousia and terms that became significant for Trinitarian doctrine. They're not there in the New Testament, but it is implicitly there as a seed. And it took the first few centuries of a lot of conflict and debate and heresy, like people saying something was like, well,
Yeah.
people saying Jesus wasn't fully human. We can't say that, dude, because we start grappling. We go, no, 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 he's fully divine, fully human. Well, he wasn't fully divine. Well, no, 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 we can't say that, and over that process of grappling, like the seed gets unfolded and unpacked and developed in a way that's consistent with what came earlier. And for Newman, that begins to play out with a whole bunch of different doctrines. Now, for him, that leads ultimately downstream to Catholic faith, which I don't know that I'm there, but I am really intrigued by the idea that doctrine develops over time as the Spirit is
Absolutely.
at work through the church as the global body of Christ. And so it's not just let's go back and find our proof text. It's, dude, how has, and we have to be able to show that, dude, this is um, unfolding. The tree's not going to look different from, like
Yeah.
it, what's the word? It's organically inherently related to what has come prior. But that there's a developing understanding of doctrine that, that, yeah, that maybe we can't go back and find this text for it, but within the constellation of Christian doctrine as a whole, it begins to unfold in a way that's congruous with what's come before, you know?
Sure.
I don't know
That
if
is
that makes
awesome.
sense, but I was like, yeah,
No, no,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's helpful in a lot of ways. There's like 8,000 things that I could get into there, but I won't do it this
yeah.
time. We'll have you back on another time and
Yes.
and get through it. But
Sounds fun.
but I appreciate it,
Sounds
man.
fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on here. And is there anywhere that people can catch up with you? I know, please, like I've already said, go check out all the books. Go get God Is on Your Side. It's incredible. But is there anywhere that people can follow up with you?
Thanks, man. Yeah, totally. So my website's joshuaryanbutler.com, just my full name. And that's got, I think, yeah, ways to get in touch with me there. And then on social media, I'm mostly on Instagram these days. So yeah, I've Josh Butler PDX, if I remember right. I think that's my handle. I
Yep.
should know it. Yeah, totally. But you can search for me and find me out there as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on here, dude. And yeah, really genuinely, like I've said the entire episode, one of my favorite authors and been very helpful to my ministry and many others. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for hopping on here, dude.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, man. Have a great, yeah, it was great. Love the conversation, man. Great connecting.
Of course. Of course. Yeah, dude, thank you so much.